Thanks for joining this top of the policies session. So I'm going to be chairing this session, and I'm going to be as neutral and rigorous as the counting agent in the state of Pennsylvania, even though one of my colleagues is one of the contestants in this gladiatorial battle. I just wanted to start with some housekeeping. So please, could you keep yourself on mute unless we kind of invite you to speak, and please do feel free to use the chat box to put in any kind of comments on the ideas that you'll hear, or any questions that you want to ask to Alex, Graham and Anna. So this top of the policies session is about the kind of big ideas that we think can improve basic skills policy, the things that we could do to really transform kind of access to learning and the outcomes from learning. So I'm delighted to be joined by kind of three real experts in the area. We'll first hear from Graham Griffiths, who's lecturer in mathematics education at the Institute for Education. We'll then hear from Alex Stevenson, who's the head of English, Maths and ESOL at Learning and Work Institute. And then we'll hear from Anna Grant, who's Senior Development and Policy Officer at Carnegie UK. Graham's going to be pitching his proposal around teacher education. Alex will be pitching his proposal for an online skills checker, and Anna will be talking about what we need to do around digital inclusion. Each presenter will have 5 minutes and no longer than 5 minutes. I will be ruthless on the timing to make sure that we get enough time for your questions and comments. They will be setting out why their idea is needed, so what's the problem they're trying to fix, what their idea would involve, and why it would make a real difference in the area that they're talking about. Following that, we will have about 5 minutes after each for questions and comments. So I'd be really keen to get your thoughts on their ideas, your questions for the panelists. And I'd be keen to encourage panelists to ask each other questions, but please no trash talking, and let's keep it clean. At the end, we're going to have a vote. It's probably the second or maybe the most important vote that we've seen in the last couple of days, but hopefully it'll be more conclusive. And then we will crown our top of the policies champion for 2020. I would like to kick off by inviting inviting Graham to pitch your idea. You've got 5 minutes to set out your idea around teacher education before we give you a thorough grilling. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Right, I feel slightly set up by Alex asked me to do this, and I'm not quite sure why he's put me forward for this. Anyway, we'll see how this goes. But I do propose that we have a review of the professional development of teachers, of in fact all adult learners. And my thoughts around this are that we need to update ourselves on the needs of existing staff. So that's initial qualifications and ongoing development. That we should look at consulting on a framework for actually ITE post-16, because I think the world has changed a bit now. That we review, go back to having a requirement for appropriate qualifications to be held within publicly funded provision, and that there is a support package provided to encourage qualification and professional development take up. So why do I think it's important? Well, we've had, the history of professional development of teachers in relation to this in this sector has been quite an interesting one. We went through a whole period where they were introduced, they became a requirement, at least in certain institutions, and then that widened, and then we had changes of government that then meant that we pulled back from that, so that requirement for qualifications has gone. And what I'm interested in is what sort of effect that's having. So I think the review would be looking partly at that. So, I mean, I've been noticing that some jobs, basically jobs are advertised and the requirements that they have are slightly beginning to change. So there was an expectation that people would have a subject specialist qualification for numeracy, ESOL, literacy, I'm seeing job adverts that don't necessarily require that anymore, and that slightly unnerves me. And anyway, it's not, and I don't think it is just about basic skills, by the way. I think we really do need to think about all adult learning. So the teacher education requirements, given that there is going to be other expansion in adult learning into the future. So I think we need to review it partly because of that too anyway. Now the ETF, of course, have taken over from the SVUK qualifications that we had, and they've sort of looked at the structures and haven't made too much change. But are we in the right place with this? I mean, the original qualifications were seen essentially as being like the equivalent that we needed to have something like a subject qualification before people did teach training. So if you're a history teacher, you expect people to have a history degree and then do some teacher training. Here, there was the idea that people would need some extra information, and that was the original qualifications. That got changed so that it was essentially a kind of subjects pedagogy that people were developing. So they were embedded within teacher training ideas, and we might want to review some of how that works. And I kind of do feel that that when we've since I've been undertaking lots of teacher training and things, one of the things that's come in that's been really quite interesting for me in mathematics has been the subject knowledge enhancement funding that's been around. And to some extent, I think that might answer some of these queries about whether it's about subject pedagogy or an extra piece of knowledge that people need to know, like having a history degree, might be to have something like something like a subject knowledge enhancement program, either before or parallel to teacher training that's happening at the same time. And that might give the way that these can be funded. So I think, sorry, just checking the time, that overall, we really need to look at this because as far as to my knowledge, the numbers that are number of courses out there have been shrinking gradually. The requirements seem to be changing about what people are asking for. So I think we're on the edge of something that's really rather worrying, and it needs to be reviewed. But I think we also need to look at, it's not just reinstating what we have, but actually going back and looking at something new. So I think I'm going to stop there, which is a little bit short of the 5 minutes.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Graham. We've now got our time to sort of put our questions to Graham and to add any comments on his idea. I'll kick off one from Tony Lamb. If you've got any other questions, please do pop them in the box, and also Anna and Alex, do feel free to chuck in your questions too. So Tony's question is it possible to have mandatory qualifications when contracts in the sector are so insecure? So is it possible to do with that kind of current workforce model, or is it something we need to change as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, and that was also a problem when this was introduced in the first place. And obviously, one did there was a time given in order to achieve these qualifications. It wasn't necessarily you had to have the mandatory qualification in advance, but that you needed to either be doing it in advance or be doing it on the job. And I think that would be the way around that. But also, as I noticed some other people are commenting on, is the fact that perhaps this kind of casualization is part of the problem, and that we also need to look at eliminating that. And again, that was actually part of some of the strategies that were within Skills for Life, was to change that. And then quite a lot of that changed, but we've been moving backwards, I suspect. So I think it is a potential problem, but I think we need to address it. We can address it.
Fantastic. Anna or Alex, do you have any questions you want to put to Graham at all?
I've just put one in the chat box, but I'm happy to read it out. Which I was just thinking, we heard from Hannah and Karen in the main session, and so what would be the benefits of this for learners in particular? What would the impact be for people participating in basic skills classes?
Yes, it's a very good question, isn't it? I would hope that we think that teacher education does affect how people teach, and that affects the experience that learners have. It certainly felt that way. I mean, we had quite a bit of over the period of the Skills for Life strategy up until and with qualifications, there was certainly a fair bit of evidence that those experiences changed. I accept that one of the problems that we had over the whole Skills for Life thing was that it didn't necessarily alter the attainment of what happened. So it was rather scary that didn't occur. But I mean, of course, it all that does is propose it might be a necessary but not sufficient condition for what we need to do. So I think having appropriately qualified teachers and appropriately developed teachers, and I do think it's important. It's not just about initial qualifications; it's about ongoing professional development. That we need to make sure that we do engage our learners appropriately.
Fantastic, thanks, Graham. Just struggling with my mute there. We've got another question from Faye Stone, who's asked, do we need to move teacher education back to universities? So we've had the question about kind of the workforce model and the kind of casualisation in the sector, but again about where this teaching takes place. Does it need to be provided by universities, or can it be?
Well, I don't think. Yes, it's a really interesting one. I mean, obviously, I have I work in a university, and I've been working in a university some while. I mean, it is worth saying that when I started, at the beginning of Skills for Life, I was working in a college, and we ran teacher training within those colleges, and were developing some of those early subject specialism programs back then as well. So I've known it from that angle as well. I don't think it needs to be in higher education. I think obviously I would suggest that higher education does offer lots of opportunities, but that doesn't mean that can't be provided. There is higher education going on in FE. I'm not specifically thinking that is it needs to be in universities. What I am concerned about is that the government does seem to have a bit, or at least some elements of the governing party seem to want to have a war with universities and actually want to remove it. And I think that's more of my concern. And it has actually happened. I mean, there is less basic skill, the adult numeracy, literacy, ESOL provision in universities now than there was quite a while ago when I first got involved.
Fantastic. Any final questions for Graham at all? I think one from Fiona about how we can better equip teachers to identify and support people with diversely learning needs and difficulties. Any thoughts on that and how it relates to the kind of professional qualification requirements?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely. I mean, clearly there needs to be an aspect of that in initial teacher education. I mean, we do raise those kind of issues within teacher education, but obviously at that point, especially if you're doing it within a 1-year course program, there's not a lot. You can't do everything, and clearly there does need to be a kind of an ongoing look at this. So this is where I think professional development ongoing is really important, to keep those channels running, to keep rethinking those things, and to keep looking back. So I think I mean, there isn't a complete answer to that, but I mean it's got to be ongoing, I would say.
Great. And I'll just throw a couple of final questions in, one on cost and one on benefit, if that's okay. So the first one, which is from Faye, is just highlighting the financial restraints on running teacher training. So I guess the question on there would be, is there a significant cost involved in sort of introducing a kind of requirement for professional qualification?
Well,
and do you have an idea of that? And then just one on benefit as well. Do you think, so if you were stuck in a lift with Gavin Williamson and you were trying to convince him both that the cost is worth it and the benefit is real, and what would you sort of point to in terms of the kind of evidence of the impact on learner outcomes of having kind of teacher qualifications?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. Right. I mean, in terms of the financial restraints of running training, I mean, obviously the point is this needs funding. I mean, and obviously this is one of the reasons why there was a step back when with the coalition from some of these requirements. I mean, that's what, even if you weren't anti-university, then we were still in an austerity era. So obviously there is money needed in order to make this happen, but it's money that's being made to happen in other sectors. I mean, we still, despite some people's opinions, expect to have teachers trained for school teaching, and I don't understand why we wouldn't expect the same for anyone else that's in education, frankly. So I mean, yes, I can't give you a number because it's going to be different. I would suggest that the amounts of money that have been, that have been historically within awarding organisations probably aren't that great and probably should be improved. And we probably have a better funding system in universities to make some of these things happen. But Jan, obviously, the issue of learner outcomes, yes. Well, I mean, as I said, the trouble is, we had a whole Skills for Life strategy, and it didn't actually show much evidence on learner outcomes. So, as I say, I think for me, it's more of it's not a sufficient thing to make these things happen, but it is a necessary thing to make things happen, that we have appropriate professional development of teachers.
Fantastic, excellent. Thanks very much, Graham. We're next going to be moving on to Alex Stevenson of Learning Work Institute. So Alex is going to be pitching his idea about a digital online skills checker. He will have 5 minutes, and then he will have a thorough grilling from yourselves and from fellow contestants. So over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Joe. So bear with me while I manage the twin challenge of unmuting myself and looking for my notes, but I think I've done the first one. Yeah, I'm here to propose the development of a national online skills check tool for adult basic skills. As we've already heard this morning, around 9 million adults could benefit from improving basic skills such as literacy and numeracy, yet we know that participation in adult English and maths provision is in steep decline. So, as well as supporting providers to deliver learning opportunities in more flexible and accessible ways, we need to stimulate the demand. And by raising awareness of skills needs and the benefits of tackling them, we can encourage more adults to take up basic skills learning. So why do we need an online basic skills checker? Well, as we've also heard this morning, our annual participation in learning survey shows that many adults don't see how learning is relevant to them and how it can benefit them. So the purpose of a skills check is not to assess their levels or anything as formal as that. It's to help adults start contemplating learning, to understand how it might benefit them, and to help foster the determination to take up learning. Now, although there are many tools on the market to help assess English and math skills, our research suggests that there is in fact a gap in the market for a simple universal skills screener. While some tools do exist, not all of them are freely available, especially outside of learning provider settings, and many of the products that are marketed as skills screeners or checkers are actually part of a more in-depth initial or diagnostic assessment tool. Those are important as well, but they have a different purpose. So, outside of learning provision, there's no standardized approach to conducting basic skills checks or for making referrals to basic skills provision for people who it might benefit. And that applies across a range of public services and civil society settings, for example, schools, job centres, libraries, healthcare settings, and other support services. A bit like we heard from Helen Ryan in the plenary session before, where she talked about taking literacy to where people are. The issue is that potential intermediaries in some of those settings, despite being well placed to identify basic skills needs, may not feel confident to support their clients to engage with the skills check, and having a standardized tool could help with that challenge. So what would an online skills check look like? Well, our research suggests that it should be available in a range of formats, and particularly relevant at the moment, it should be mobile first, it should be web-based. We would, of course, ensure that there was, the appropriate sort of paper-based alternatives for people who don't have the basic digital skills to conduct an online skills check. But we think that many people could be engaged through a mobile-first website or application. It would be clear and easy to use and accessible and really quick to complete, around about 10 to 15 minutes at the most. Most importantly, it wouldn't be like a test. It would use contextualized scenarios and be available in different versions for different settings, such as the workplace. And being online, it could even use elements of gamification to make it fun. Another advantage would be that it would be able to provide some instantaneous feedback and potentially connect to opportunities for live support through a callback, or perhaps direct to some other information about learning opportunities. The tool would avoid a deficit view of adult skills by ensuring that the feedback and information about next steps were framed in a positive way. So overall, an online skills checker would help to identify potential skills need and support adults into suitable provision by providing information on how to do that. It could be embedded within a range of other policy initiatives, such as the Skills Toolkit, skills entitlements, and also embedded widely throughout information, advice, and guidance services. This would lead to increased awareness of skills gaps amongst adults, increased opportunities for adults to be supported, signposted, or referred by a range of public services and civil society organisations, and it would move more adults from not actively considering learning to actively contemplating participation and determining to take up learning. So this would help address the central challenge of falling participation in adult basic skills provision and help more people to get the skills they need to get on in life.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Alex. Sorry, stuck on mute again. With the first question we've got is from Jude Mortimer, who's asked, how would the skills checker differ from the National Numeracy Challenge?
Good question. So we envisage a tool that would cover a range of basic skills. So it would quickly identify literacy, numeracy, potentially allow people to flag up that English is not their first language, and it could even be extended to some extent, potentially to look at some kinds of digital skills. But I think the main focus would be on looking at English, maths and language skills holistically, rather than having separate products from, for separate purposes, because I think for many adults and many people who could benefit from addressing basic skills, there's a need to look at things in a more holistic way, rather than sort of, siloing their literacy needs over here, their numeracy needs over here, and something else about their digital skills. So this would be part of taking a more joined up approach to helping adults who could benefit. Great,
thanks, Alex. A question from Jude, excellent question, and I was thinking something similar. So Jude's question is about whether it would be hard to reach for the people who we would need to access this. So I was wondering, how can we design a tool to check people's basic digital skills, for which basic digital skills isn't a barrier to accessing the tool?
Yeah. There already are some examples of that online, actually, for digital skills. I think the thing is to bear in mind that this could be done in a number of different ways. So being online, it could be something that adults who feel confident and motivated to do so could access themselves, and it could be shared widely through social media and so on. But also for those who would need more support to engage with it, it could be something that you envisage being done with somebody sat next to you to support, kind of thing, even though it's online. And even in some cases, as I mentioned, you'd need to include some paper-based options and materials, but the result could still be inputted online if that's the route to unlock further referral or information and so on. So an advisor, an intermediary, whether in Job Centre Plus or in a public library or in a healthcare setting, could actually support an individual to complete the skills check and help them digest the feedback and information that it gives them. But crucially, they wouldn't need to be an expert in any of that, because they would have the tool to do it for them.
Fantastic. There was another question about, in terms of signposting for people after they completed it. Is this a sort of a kind of national tool, or is it something that would be kind of locally flexible?
Very good question. Certainly this bit is kind of one of the sort of, less well developed areas of what it would look like, but certainly there's great potential here to take advantage of it being an online tool to connect to information about provision and courses. So there's probably other actions that are complementary that need to take place, more widely. But we know, for example, in some areas, there's now very extensive information online about opportunities to learn ESOL. And so potentially you could look at linking up to websites that tell you what ESOL classes are available locally. There's maybe a bit more work to do around basic skills, but, local areas now that have their devolved adult education budget are starting to innovate and look at how they can do things differently, and it could sit within that. It could also link to established sources of information, advice and guidance through the careers service. And, potentially it could sit as part of wider policy development. So, if we're looking at the idea of skills accounts and that kind of thing, it could sit within an online skills account and unlock various entitlements to provision and then tell you where you can go to realise this entitlement. So I think there's lots of, there's lots of potential applications for it.
Great, thanks, Alex. I'm concerned the comments and questions are overwhelmingly positive so far. So do we have any really tough questions, any kind of angles, any kind of critiques that people want to throw in at all to grill Alex? I'm particularly keen to encourage Graham and Anna to try and sort of knock down Alex's idea a little bit. So any kind of challenges with the proposal that people can identify?
Well, I threw the comments into the chat anyway. I just remember, over many years, we've given people bits of paper tests to do, and frankly, just talking to somebody for a little bit seems to get out what you need to know very, very quickly. I understand, Alex, you're saying you're not going to run you're not planning to have those kind of really complex kind of programs that go. I remember sitting watching a student being initially assessed on one of those things that keeps changing the questions every time they go. They kept thinking they were coming to the end of it, and then there'd be another series of questions, and then there'd be another series of questions. They gave up. They were giving in. They were stopping answering questions. And of course, the other problem that you have with any kind of online assessment is, I remember seeing the results of another maths test where the person had input the fraction that the answer was in a different format to what was expected. So they were getting all the answers wrong. But actually, when you saw the actual response they gave, if you actually read it, you'd realize they knew exactly what they were talking about. So I think it's always going to be problematic using this kind of technology. But I agree that I think as long as it's part of something else. Jan was in the comments there was pointing about how you could use it with other people. Other people could be part of that provision. That makes a lot of sense. But it's not ever going to get to everybody. I think that's
a similar question from or concern raised by Paul Sini, who said that the West tool in Wales aims to do a similar thing. But not without problems, and he asks if providers may use this as a kind of a surrogate for, or a kind of replacement for, proper initial diagnostic assessment. I think on that one I particularly throw in the fact that some recent Learning and Work Institute research that we did for DFE showed that on apprenticeships the initial assessment that should be taking place of learners' kind of skills and experience, the prior learning assessment, in a lot of cases isn't taking place. So how do we make sure that this adds to what's done rather than doing those, shifting what should be that face-to-face assessment into a kind of cheap digital tool?
Yeah, so thank you for all those comments, all very relevant points, and I do agree with what Graham's saying about sort of elaborate online assessment tools that learners struggle with. This exists in a bit of a different space, really. It comes before you do any of that. So that in-depth assessment at the start of a course should always be done by somebody who has the appropriate skills and training and knowledge to do so, and whether that's face-to-face or having a conversation with somebody or whatever, that should be done by probably one of Graham's highly trained, educated, subject specialist, qualified practitioners who would really know what they're doing there and can deliver that assessment in an appropriate way, whether it's online, paper-based or whatever. And there are lots of challenges around that. This exists in a space before that, and it's not really about checking somebody's level of skills or anything as complicated as that. It is simply something that would establish, does somebody have potentially a need? Could they benefit from this just being checked out in a bit more detail? And that means that you can do it in a much more engaging way. It doesn't matter so much, we're not going to be looking probably for specific fraction formats for the answers to their questions. And it could be done by non-specialists as well. So it's primarily a tool for engagement and starting a conversation about learning, rather than a rigorous assessment of what program somebody should be onto. Obviously, in response to your point, Joe, that should take part of the start of any learning process, but that's a job for the providers and practitioners. This is something that would be used by people who are well placed to get people through the door in the first place.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Alex. I think that's enough rigorous assessment of your idea for today. So thank you very much, and apologies for encouraging the grilling. So our final proposal is Anna from Carnegie. So Anna's going to be pitching her idea around how we can support digital inclusion around adult basic skills. So over to you, Anna, for 5 minutes, and then we will pose some questions to you before the all-important vote.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm Anna from Carnegie. For those of you who don't know us, we're a policy organisation based up in Scotland, but we work across the UK with a real core focus on improving wellbeing for individuals and communities. And for the past 5 years, we've been working quite heavily around digital. So I'll caveat that I'm more of a digital person than I am a more general adult skills person, but there's a real crossover between the two, as we've discussed. And for the past year, we've been working on a project with the Good Things Foundation, investigating a new blended approach to developing digital inclusion and digital skills within ESOL settings. So it's a recommendation from this work that I want to pitch to you all today, but actually I feel like quite a lot of my work is already done for me in terms of how much digital has come up across these sessions. So my policy pitch is around we recommend exploring the more formalised development of a holistic adult skills offer, which combines developing both the essential digital skills with ESOL or other basic adult skills development through a blended learning approach. It's also important to say that digital inclusion touches on many things. It's not a one-dimensional issue, of which skills is just one aspect of how to support people. They need access to devices at a price that they can afford with internet connectivity, but really importantly, they also need the skills, the ability, the confidence and motivation to use these technologies safely and productively and enjoyably in both their work, life and personal settings, but also importantly for work. We know that this is a really big challenge at the moment. There's interestingly, you said that there's 9 million people that lack basic skills. There's also around 9 million people that struggle to use the internet independently, and we know that there's some big predictors of that, being unemployed or on a low income or with few qualifications. We know are big predictors of people struggling to be able to use the internet effectively. We also know this is a big problem for the adult skills sector and actually for society more generally. We know that individuals with lower levels of basic digital skills or no levels of basic digital skills have reduced access for social interactions, which we see now more than ever is hugely important. Lower consumer choice, which ends up costing individuals a lot extra. We see less access to information and, really importantly, to opportunities, and particularly importantly around education and employment, not just to find out about those opportunities and apply for those opportunities, but actually to undertake and participate. Without access to digital skills and access to digital technology, there's a really reduced flexibility for people to participate online in those adult skills or in further education and learning, as we're doing here today. And again, as touched on by many of the other speakers, people may not have that environment in which to participate. So given all of these issues around individuals lacking basic digital skills, we therefore recommend this policy of exploring a more formalised development of a really holistic adult skills offer, which I think Alex also mentioned, which really combines developing essential digital skills with other basic skills in a complementary and kind of blended learning fashion, really bringing together those two aspects of learning for a more formal qualification across both. Historically, we could probably argue that digital skill support has been quite siloed. It's been quite narrowly focused. You know, we see kind of specific digital or computer classes, and they tend to be focused and marketed at quite specific individuals. But actually what we know about best practice and supporting people to develop digital skills is through trusted organizations in face-to-face settings in a positive and welcoming environment. You know, as Helen mentioned earlier, really meeting people where they are. So actually in practice, we've seen practitioners in adult basic skills supporting digital informally very effectively for many, many years. They just haven't necessarily been recognised for this work, either in more formal educational spaces or even in digital inclusion spaces, you know, as other types of organisations and sectors that are also doing great work have possibly been more recognised. And we also see this in the kind of limited research available around best practice in this space, but the limited evidence that we do have suggests that enabling digital to become really core to what and how basic adult skills are taught improves outcomes for learners. It reinforces learning across the different skills. You're able to reach new audiences who may not have engaged with one of the types of learning. You're able to align more closely to learner motivation and to personalised learning. You know, again, as the learner Hannah was talking about earlier, really doing it for you and your personal reasons. And it challenges you know, a number of those negative implications that we touched on earlier. We also now have a real opportunity on the horizon with digital skills, so the introduction of the national entitlement and the reinforced recognition from the government of the importance of digital skills. So it's a real need to take advantage and bring the digital skills offer really into the basic adult skills offer more generally. We know that there's going to be some challenges in doing this. You know, there'll need to be a raft of other methods to support that from, you know, as we talked about today, staff development, improved data quality, improved understanding at the beginning of where to signpost people. But yeah, so just to summarise very quickly, sorry, I know I've run over my very strict allocation of timing, but to summarise, so we know that there are still many people in the UK who aren't digitally included and lack digital skills, and these are really detrimental to individual well-being. We have evidence that digital can be delivered alongside and complementary to other basic skills, which can be beneficial for both aspects of learning. We know that practitioners are already doing this in many cases, but not being recognised. So therefore, we feel that this is a really timely and effective policy recommendation to really strengthen the adult basic skills offer now and in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Anna, and only slightly over, so you got away with that one. We've got some questions coming into the chat. Please do add your question if you want to put one to Anna. We've got a question from Tony about whether this would require making equipment widely available in centres of provision. I think one thing that's been quite interesting and high prominent with schools, at least, is that the kind of the learning from home has made a lot of people realise that a lot of people still lack that access to digital kind of technology. So would this require us to think about access to digital technology both for individuals and for providers?
Yeah, I think absolutely it does, and I think as a couple of the comments that have pointed out, the challenges is both centres and the learning spaces being able to have access to the types of technologies that people want to be able to use, and also individuals then being able to have access to those to be able to repeat and continue that learning outside of the more formal classroom setting. I think interestingly in the last few months since the pandemic, we've seen a real strengthening of initiatives around how to reuse devices and how to supply and support community organisations and other more formal education settings with access to more up-to-date devices. But I do think it's not going to be a small issue. We know that just from the small amounts of research that we've done, the access to the kit is a really, really significant issue, and not just access to any kit, access to kit that will really support learners. So it's kit that isn't out of date or isn't going to go out of date, very shortly, so that the programs won't be able to be used in a safe way. And it's about trying to balance how do you support learners to being able to use the equipment that they want to use and will use regularly, so like phones, with other equipment that they might be beneficial in other settings, for example, laptops and computers computers, which may be more beneficial in, you know, education or employment settings. How do you blend that? But at the moment, we just don't know enough about what centres and what places are lacking. So yeah, much more further investment and resource into understanding this challenge is really important as well.
Fantastic. Any further questions that people want to ask, or do Graham or Alex want to put a question to Anna at all? One of the things that a couple of people mentioned in the chat is about the impact on COVID on adult skills providers. I guess this is something ideally you would plan, test, pilot, and develop, and then roll out. But any thoughts on what the current context, where it may be that we're doing sort of distance learning for quite some time in a lot of contexts? Any thoughts about how we could do this kind of rapidly to make sure that people are able to access learning and are kind of digitally included?
Yeah, so sorry if that's meant me to go. I think it's building on what we know already works. So we know that there are lots of programs out there that have been really impactful in supporting people become digitally included, even throughout the pandemic, and even through the most stringent aspects of lockdown and social distancing. You know, lots of things that work, like the Good Things Foundation are doing, trying to nationally reach and support delivering not just skill support, but also devices and connectivity. I think it's a real opportunity, not if necessary opportunity is the correct word to use, but to really try and push the policy world to really try and do something ambitious. You know, this has been one of the first times, certainly in the 4 or 5 years that I've been working around digital inclusion policy, that you see it in headlines, you see people talking about it, and we really need to build on that to then be able to provide the support that centres and that individuals really need to become digitally included, to be able to engage with all of these, you know, really important skills-based learning that they will need as a result of changes in the economy and in education as a result of the pandemic.
Fantastic, excellent. Well, thanks very much for that, Anna. We are approaching the end of our time, so I'd like to open the polls, if that's possible. So you'll be able to all vote when we get that up. It should be on your screen now. So we've got the online skills checker proposed by Alex Stevenson, teacher education proposed by and qualifications proposed by Graham Griffiths, and then digital inclusion proposed by Anna Grant. So if you could all vote now, and then we will get out the results. Oh, I can't vote apparently. I've been disenfranchised. So just a reminder to stick your vote in. Tony wants to vote for everyone, which is fantastic. So the poll should be coming up on your screen, or if not, you should be able to access it in I think in the More section, potentially. And when we've got as many votes as possible, if we could publish the results of the poll. And in terms of those ideas, if people are interested in exploring them more, I'm sure Graham, Anna and Alex would be happy for people to get in touch with them. We're quite interested in Alex's idea about a online kind of skills checker. So if people are interested in thinking about how we could develop and pilot that, please do get in touch. So hopefully that's been enough time for everyone to vote. There we go. Right. Oh, well, it's a very close one. So congratulations to Alex, who with 9 votes is today's top of the policies. But fantastic effort from Anna and from Graham, who were very close behind. This is another kind of nail-biting, nervy vote. So congratulations to everyone. We are going to be going back into the plenary session to hear from Gillian Keegan MP, the Apprenticeships and Skills Minister, which is going to be kicking off at 12:15. So you've got time to have a comfort break, to catch up on your emails and to others goings on in the world, which has started to look a lot more positive since we started this session. So thank you very much for joining, and if you could join me in virtually thanking Alex, Anna, and Graham for their presentations, and thank you for all your questions. Great, thanks everyone.